Good afternoon, everybody, and again, a very warm welcome to our fifth and final webinar, which this week we're lucky to have with us Neil from the Travel Gallery, and we'll be talking all about Sri Lanka and the Indian Ocean. We've worked with Travel Gallery since our business started just over 4.5 years ago, and with Neil, his wife Fazana, and the team at Travel Gallery, we've had many happy customers visit Sri Lanka and also the Maldives as well. As always, we'll be doing a prize draw at the end of today's webinar to give one person £200 towards their next holiday with Swords Travel, the Travel Gallery, to either Sri Lanka or the Indian Ocean, or should I say, and the Indian Ocean as well. So without hesitation, I'm now going to hand you over to Neil just to introduce himself and tell you a little bit more about the Travel Gallery.
Thanks, Mark. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Mark, so you're going to turn it over so I can see my self-presenting in mode as well, is that right?
Oh, you're live at the moment, Neil. Everybody can see you, and then if you let me know whenever you're ready, I'll put the presentation up.
Perfect. Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you. Delighted, Mark and team at Swords. Thank you very much for inviting us. As Mark said, yeah, we've worked with them since they set up their business and seen the business grow and mature. We're delighted to be a partner both for Sri Lanka, which I'm going to really focus on today, but also I'm going to talk about the Indian Ocean a bit more widely, particularly the Maldives today. So yeah, if you'd like to share my screen, Mark, and I'll move straight on.
Yep, live, go for it.
So the way I've structured really the presentation today is to take you as a walk through the Indian Ocean. And a walkthrough in particular Sri Lanka, what you can do in Sri Lanka, where you might want to stay, and also where you'd go at different times of the year, because there's quite a big difference between where you would go in the winter months, the UK winter months, and the summer months. So before we start, let's just say, can we travel to the Indian Ocean at the moment? And the answer to that question is yes and no. If we start on the right-hand side, the Maldives is fully open. We're sending a lot of people to the Maldives at the moment. You have to do a PCR test, as I think we're generally finding with many locations around the world. You can do that within 96 hours of traveling. You have to have a temperature check on arrival, but frankly, once you arrive, your holiday is as normal. You transfer to your island and you get on with it. The Seychelles is in theory open, but the reality is, when you get there, you have to spend 5 days in a hotel, which is an approved hotel, and at that point, you're then effectively in self-isolation for the best part of 5 days. You can move around your hotel, and then after that, providing you have a negative PCR test, you're free to go. Sri Lanka, contrary to being on a travel corridor, and contrary to having no FCDO restrictions, no Foreign Office restrictions, at the moment you can't actually go into the country because of the restriction from the Sri Lankan government. We see that changing early in the new year, but just for long stays. But we think Sri Lanka will be back to normal by the second quarter of next year. So that's why we can talk very confidently, I think, about Sri Lanka as a destination for summer holidays in 2021. And Mauritius, similar to Sri Lanka, closed at the moment. We don't see Mauritius reopening until really the beginning of the second quarter next year, and then it will be back, and I think it'll be very much back to normal by the summer. Go back to Sri Lanka. Let's focus on Sri Lanka, and then we'll move on to talk about the Maldives. Sri Lanka. Why is my passion for Sri Lanka? Well, I'm married to a Sri Lankan. I have been for 35 years. I normally live for half of the year in Sri Lanka, flitting backwards and forwards between the UK and Sri Lanka. We have the business here, and we also own a boutique hotel in Sri Lanka, which I'll come on to talk about a little bit later. Sri Lanka is a 10.5-hour flight from London. We personally recommend Sri Lankan Airlines if we can get people to book on that. They're part of One World. They're an excellent airlines. The aircraft are 5 or 6 years old. They're well maintained, and it's direct non-stop. Of course, you couldn't go by the Middle East, and all of the Middle Eastern airlines offer Sri Lanka as a destination. Generally, in every single case, it's an overnight flight on the way out. And on the way back, if it's Sri Lankan, it's a day flight, unless, again, in the winter months, there is an overnight flight, occasionally optional at the weekends. and we'll have to wait to see once the schedules reopen post-COVID how that works out. For Sri Lanka, we would generally say if you're going there and you're saying, I just want a beach holiday, well, there's better places to go that are probably cheaper and where the choice is wider. Sri Lanka is about actually doing a touring holiday and then a beach. It combines brilliantly with the Maldives, as I'll go on to talk about in a bit. And we would generally say avoid combining it with anywhere else in Asia. We do hear people say, well, can I do Thailand and Sri Lanka? Can I do India and Sri Lanka? Yes, you can, but the complexity of the flights will be more difficult. And also, I've got to say, you'll miss out on the opportunities that Sri Lanka has to offer. So let's focus on two different main itineraries. And this is why there are two monsoons that affect Sri Lanka. Hopefully my mouse is working okay and you can see it here. So the northeast monsoon on the east coast here comes across and hits Sri Lanka between November and March. That means that this east coast area in our winter months is rough in seas and there's likely to be a lot of rainfall. The second monsoon which affects the island, as we see here, is the southeast monsoon, which comes from this general direction, hitting the west coast and the south coast, and that generally affects in May and June. There is an intermonsoonal period, July, August, September, and then it comes back again October, November. And taking out of that, therefore, the best season for the west coast and the south coast is between the beginning of December and April. So I'm going to focus using those monsoons on a couple of different itineraries. The first itinerary I want to look at is what I've called a family or a honeymoon summer itinerary. Clearly it's perfectly okay for a couple as well who are not on their honeymoon. But the reason we say a honeymoon is obviously people getting married traditionally in the UK in May, June, July, looking for somewhere to go. The east coast of Sri Lanka is definitely one of those options. For the family as well, looking for that east coast for a summer break. We typically say with an east coast itinerary that you should be looking at three centres. The airport is here, just north of Colombo on the west coast. The journey from the airport up to the cultural triangle here is approximately 4 hours, and it's probably one of the least interesting journeys in Sri Lanka. So what we would generally say is fly overnight, arrive either on the direct flight with Sri Lankan or one of the Middle Eastern airline options. They all come in a very similar time, get in the car and do a transfer on the day of arrival. Your body clock is telling you that it's earlier than it is anyway. If you go and flop by the beach near the airport, you'll probably fall asleep. They'll not want to get up early the next morning, the time difference, to make a 4-hour journey. So why not transfer on arrival, and then you're actually going to start your holiday from the next day. You're in the destination you want to be. We would typically say you need 3 or 4 nights in this region, what I've called the cultural triangle, and I'll show you why in a minute. We'd then suggest you go across to the east coast for your beach day. And this itinerary particularly focuses, you can see, on the beach. And I think with the east coast beaches, it's pretty unusual for us to send people across there for less than 6 days. So with this summer itinerary, perhaps a little less touring than a winter itinerary and a little bit more focus on the beach. But one of the things you can do is also split where you stay on the beaches. So you can do 4 nights and 4 nights, or of course you can have a week in the same place. And with this summer itinerary, we then suggest you come back across the island to the low hill country, to the area around Kandy, and do around 3 days there before departing back to the airport for the return flight to the UK. So let's take a look at what this might actually let you enjoy. So I'm also going to come back and tell you about extending the summer itinerary into the high tea country, and I'll talk to you a little about that a little bit later. A lot of people say high tea country is very important. I'll talk about the pros and cons a little bit later. I'm then going to also come on and talk about the winter itinerary, and we'll come back to this in a minute. The winter itinerary, as you can see, does not go across onto the east coast. It comes down to the south coast and the west coast. And we'll come back and look at those. So let's have a look and start. What are we going to see in the cultural triangle? Both the summer itinerary and the winter itinerary both suggest that you go to the cultural triangle. And I've tried to be as general as possible on this in terms of what you're going to see, but the cultural triangle offers 4 World Heritage Sites, 2 of which are the ancient cities of Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa. It also has the Sigiriya Rock Fortress, the Dambulla Cave Temple, and it gives you an opportunity to see a little bit of village rural life. There are also, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on this in a moment, 2 safari opportunities in this area. One is to go to the Wilpatu National Park up here in the northwest. Alternatively, to go to Minaria, which is close to Polonnaruwa here and is much closer down to the in the heart of the cultural triangle. Big difference. Wilpatu, the possibility of seeing leopard, and is what I would call a true safari experience. Minaria is about seeing elephant and is a lighter safari experience. So what can we see in this area? Let me just give you an idea of what I was talking about. The Sigiriya Rock Fortress, one of the, I have to say, probably must-dos for people visiting Sri Lanka. I put one caveat around it. There are just over 1,000 steps to get to the top. So it's not for the faint-hearted. If you are doing it, whether you're fit or let's just say a little less fit like me, I would suggest doing it first thing in the morning. It's cooler, take plenty of water with you. And actually, if you're staying in one of the very close to hotels, it's lovely to do it. Get there when the gates open at 6:30, climb to the top, come back down and have a late breakfast in your hotel. It's a marvellous way of seeing, and you tend to get very clear visibility first thing in the morning. So that's the Sigiriya Rock Fortress. The Sigiriya Rock Fortress is also very famous for these temple drawings. You may be familiar with these. These are frescoes, and they can be reached up a rather rickety staircase at Sigiriya. To the north of that, in Anuradhapura, you're going to be seeing one of the ancient cities, which is very much based around ancient temples, ancient stupas, ancient tanks. And just to explain this, you'll hear the expression tank used extensively in Sri Lanka. And what is absolutely one of the most amazing engineering feats, I think, that I've seen around the world, actually, is the fact that the irrigation systems that were developed up to 2,000 years ago in Sri Lanka by the Sri Lankan kings, the kings of these different ancient cities, who created dams, flooded them, and created watercourses throughout hundreds and hundreds of square miles to irrigate the paddy fields. So these tanks still exist today, and they form an integral part of the country as you move around it. They're also very important for wildlife as well. And this is actually the tank which is close to Anuradhapura. Polonnaruwa, very similar to Anuradhapura, but actually probably slightly more accessible. It's a more compact site. Anuradhapura, we generally say, is very good to do by bicycle. It's actually, they start at the top of a great route which takes you downhill most of the way. Whereas somewhere like Polonnaruwa, you'll drive in there with your guide and you can walk around effectively within a fenced site, a very large site, I have to say. I also mentioned the wildlife opportunities, and for many wildlife kind of enthusiasts, seeing leopard is an absolute must when you go to Sri Lanka. And I'll focus on 2 opportunities to see leopard in my presentation today. One is Wilpatu, up in the northwest. The foliage in the Wilpatu National Park is denser. For many, many years, it was uninhabitable. You couldn't go into it after the civil war in Sri Lanka until it was demined. Sadly, there was a lot of activity in that over a number of years. Today, it's very safe to go to, but it is less developed. It is more dense vegetation. But when you do get to see leopards, you get to spend serious time with them because they're not hassled by lots of jeeps out trying to see them. But you know, the opportunity is also there to see fantastic bird life. And for birding enthusiasts throughout the island, we've got some magnificent opportunities to take you into specific locations to actually experience that bird life. Where would we stay in the Cultural Triangle? And I am not going to give you a large display of lots of different hotels. I'm going to do a little bit of that when we come to the Maldives, just to give you a selection of some of the places you could stay. But I'd like to give you some samples of some of the places you can stay. And in the coming year, the opportunities with some of the discounts that are being offered for 2021 into places like Ulagala here, where we have 50% off the contract rate. This is an old, what's called Walawa. Walawa is a country house. It was a Walawa that belonged to one of the rich Kandyan families. In fact, the family who is involved in one of the larger hotels there today, the Panabuka family. And this property here has been outstandingly converted into a boutique hotel. It is absolutely beautiful. This is Ulagala. They have some, I think, 28 rooms now, which are all these individual pool villas. You can get an idea of the decor, beautifully done. And more recently, they've developed some of these newer suites, which you can see here, complete with full-size pools and great deck areas. So Ulagala is really a splendid place to go, a splendid place to experience at the beginning of your stay. And certainly for 2021 and going into 2022, very good value for money. So after 3 days, relaxing, but seeing lots of different sites in the Cultural Triangle, it'd be time to go across to the East Coast. Why the East Coast? The beaches on the East Coast are the best beaches in the island of Sri Lanka. And in particular, I'd contrast them almost with the Maldives, because I think the interesting thing is on the West Coast and the South Coast, you rarely see a very, very calm sea. It's just, it's not the nature of that side of the island. But on this side here, this is what you will expect to see in the summer months. Very flat, shallow beaches, very calm seas, and really a great opportunity to actually get into the local rural life. Limited opportunities for going to sightsee and see other bits and pieces. Although one of the things which is very popular with doing over the summer is going whale watching. Now, unfortunately, I've got this chart here, and if we can just focus on saying where is the dark green is the best opportunity to see the whales in those months that are indicated. And as you'll be able to see, the real place to go whale watching is in Marissa and on the West Coast. It is not on the East Coast. But having said that, in the summer months here, there is still opportunity from Trincomalee to go and see blue whales and to see spinner dolphins. So one of the excursions that can certainly be offered while staying over on the East Coast is a wildlife marine experience. Where would we stay over here? And again, putting in, and I focused on the Uga chain throughout in this presentation. We work very closely with them. We have lots of other hotels to sell, but they happen to have some of the nicest boutique hotels. And again, as I mentioned before, offering some outstanding value for money for the next 12 months. This is Jungle Beach. Jungle Beach, if you remember that map of the East Coast, is at the top end of my circle, north of Trincomalee, about half an hour north of Trincomalee. And it's very much built in the jungle, very nice, 4-star accommodation. It's not done to a very, very high standard, but a good 4-star plus. They would classify themselves as 5-star, but I think in the international show of things now, it's better to see it as a 4-star property. Some limited opportunities for families. There's nothing that interconnects here, although this is a cluster of rooms around a shared pool, which is good if you've got older children, particularly teenagers. But this is about enjoying the beach, the extensive beach, and enjoying the opportunities which you've got to just bask in that sea. Alternatively, you could stay in Passacuda. Now, going back to that map, that is now coming south on the East Coast, at the bottom end of where my map was showing. And this is Uga Bay by Uga Escapes. Now, Uga Bay is situated in a place called Pasakuda, and Pasakuda is a purpose-developed resort around a beautiful bay where they've built 13 hotels. So that's not for everybody, and I fully accept that. Although it's been tastefully done, the beach has not been trashed, and sadly, over the last few years, it's been very quiet over on the East Coast with the summer months. But Uga Bay is a beautiful property. It has the best part of the beach. The design of the rooms are a half a star probably up on Jungle Beach. They're done in a very nice, pleasant, contemporary style. And the beach gives a sophisticated vibe to it. It is a very good location. This is a great place as well if you want to do some diving in the summer months. So right next door to Uga Bay, or 2 or 3 hotels down, is a water sports centre run by Lanka Sportsreisen. They're a Sri Lankan company with a German tie-up. They are good, reliable, and operate safe diving and water sports facilities. Diving over here on the East Coast is not necessarily, you cannot contrast it really with how it is in the Maldives, because actually probably some of the best diving is wreck diving rather than marine diving to try and see coral, for example. So you've done the Cultural Triangle, you've done the East Coast. We now move on, and we're going to be returning back towards the West Coast and the airport. One thing to consider doing is to break in the journey in that second national park that I mentioned, Minaria, where Minaria is really all about elephant. So just to tell you a little bit more about Minaria, Minaria gets, in our summer months, so between August and September, one of the largest gatherings of wild Asian elephant anywhere in Asia. What happens is the whole countryside becomes very dry as a bone. This lake shrinks, and in fact, where the elephants are now would be probably 4 or 5 feet underwater in the winter months. It shrinks down. The water is used from the tank for keeping the irrigation going. As a result of that, the elephants are forced to come down to the tank in the afternoon to drink, because there is nowhere else to gather water in the local area. That results in typically 100+ elephants coming together in the afternoon for what can be a magical gathering of the elephants. The only thing I would say is, at the same time, you get a gathering of jeeps and people try to see them. So we try and pitch our time correctly. I would always recommend going in, although it's hotter, around early afternoon, rather than late afternoon when you get the biggest crowds. Your driver guide that you would have with you on a tour of Sri Lanka, that's why we pay them well to make decisions like that, and so you can try and avoid some of the peak times. So moving on from there, you would then come down to Kandy. So you broke the journey in Minaria, coming from the East Coast, you broke the journey in the Minaria National Park, and then you came down to the Kandy area. Kandy is low hill country. It's the ancient city, but we can offer a range of very, very good experiences to actually go with your holiday at this point. So what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about countryside that looks like this, and I'll come back to this picture in a moment. It's about going to see tea being plucked. It's about the Kandy Tooth Temple. And if you're there in August, it's also about going to the Kandy Perahara, which is the famous elephant festival. Elephants participate as part of the festival as the tooth of Buddha that is kept in one of the temples is paraded around the city over 10 days in an incredible spectacle. Definitely worth going once we get into a post-COVID era. And then one other thing you might want to consider doing here is whitewater rafting, which is very popular. So where would you stay when you're coming down to this kind of this area? Well, I'll be honest and I'll declare a vested interest. This is the property that my wife and I own, and this is a little sample of some of the things that you could get to see. That made me very homesick. Sadly, I went here for 6 days in March. I was supposed to be there for 6 weeks, and well, we all know what happened in March. I got on a plane and came back with my wife a few days after we got there. The property is a redeveloped plantation house dating back to 1926, and what we've done, including building this villa, which was opened about 18 months ago, is develop a high-end boutique hotel. But we particularly specialise in Sri Lankan food, and I think for those that have actually ever looked at our TripAdvisor comments and our guest feedback, we're generally said to be some of the best food experience that people have whenever they're in the island. So that's a typical place that we would suggest you stay for about 3 nights. One of those days would be a train journey from the estate house into Kandy, so you get a sample of the train. And then the other day would suggest around the estate doing some of those activities that you saw, whether it be bike riding, whether it be hiking up Bible Rock or a walk around the estate. So sadly, for the people who are doing that 2-week summer holiday, that's the end of the holiday, and we would suggest the 2-hour journey back to the airport to take the flight back. So a relaxed breakfast at Rosyth, leave around 8:30, back to the airport for 10:30 for the 1 o'clock flight back to the UK, returning back to the UK the same day, getting back there that evening. As well, you'll remember what I said before is we're going to now look at the winter itinerary. And I also said you can combine, both with the summer itinerary and the winter itinerary, the high tea country. So what do I mean by the high tea country? And probably the question we're asked most often is by people wanting to go up and explore the areas up in Norelia and more recently Ella in the high tea country. To put it in perspective, the Rosyth estate house that I showed you pictures of is at 1,000 feet, Kandy is at 2,000 feet, and Norelia here, as the crow flies 30 or 25, 30 miles away, is at 6,500 feet, with the surrounding hills at 8,000 feet. Ella, which is also very popular, but not marked on the map here, is actually dropping altitude slightly. You climb up to that type of height and then drop back down a little bit. But what is it going? Well, the journey on the train is one of those iconic things a lot of people want to do. I've got to say it's off the agenda, sadly, at the moment, and I don't see it coming back on really for most of 2021. I think it'll be 2022 before public travelling on public trains is allowed again in Sri Lanka as part of the COVID procedures, but we will get back to that. But going up to the high tea country, it's all about tea. Whereas our estate that my wife and I own is tea and rubber, so it's a mixture of tea and rubber. When you get up to this altitude, rubber is not grown. It's all about tea, and it's about staying in one of the old tea planters' bungalows. And this, in fact, is one of the teardrop properties, which is just outside of Ella. An absolutely beautiful property, beautifully restored and priced accordingly. But very, very nice. And for the right budget, for the right people, this is a splendid place to be staying. So this extension to go up to the high tea country can be used by the summer itinerary or the winter itinerary. On the summer itinerary, you would go from the east coast up to somewhere like Ella and then take the train down to Kandy, and for the last 3 nights before going back to the airport, either as an extension or by taking a couple of nights off the beach. And in the winter itinerary, you use it on the way to the south coast. So you'll have come from Kandy up to the high tea country and down to here. I also showed the other option, which is you can take a seaplane with a scenic flight from Kandy down to Hambantota. That's a great option, particularly if people don't like windy roads. And it's a 45-minute flight to get you down there. Why are you coming down to this area? Well, it's all about safari. This is Yala National Park, the most popular, most busy of the national parks, but you have a very, very high chance of seeing leopard. It's very unusual to go to this area and to not see leopard. But it's not just leopard. You'll see elephant, not as much elephant. If elephant's really important, and we'll take you to the Udawalawe National Park, which is about an hour's drive from Yala. And in fact, actually, depending on where you're staying, we might do both. It would work quite nicely. You're also likely to see sloth bear, and these sloth bears are like nothing I've seen elsewhere in the world. The only thing is they've become quite tame, and some of them actually like to come up and almost to entertain the guests who are in jeeps. Where to stay? Well, again, let's just give you a quick showing here of Chenna Huts. Right next door to this property is another place called Wild Coast Tented Lodge. Wild Coast Tented Lodge is Relay Chateau, smaller rooms, more of a tented style, although they're not tents. But my preference is for Uga Bay. I think it's got a great location, better sound service, they give very good value for money, and the rooms are a great size. So having done that safari down the south coast, then most people would want to come and spend some time around the beach. And if we start from this area here in Angle, you've got a number of bigger hotels and boutique hotels in this area, places like the Anantara, or the small boutique properties, or the Aman indeed. And if we come a little bit further round towards Galle, as you're travelling along, this is one of the iconic photos which Sri Lanka is most famous for, which is the stilt fisherman. I have to say, you're more likely to see people standing up there and then somebody on the beach asking you to pay the guys for the photo than you are likely to see these guys out probably catching fish. In the season, again, from the middle of November until April, whale watching from Marissa, which is close to Galle, is one of the big things to do down on the south coast here. Again, a very high likelihood of seeing whale. I went out on one of these boats, only a matter of 20 minutes out from the shore, and some great sightings of whales. But unfortunately, again, it had become very popular, and you can get a lot of boats. The Dutch fort of Galle is a must as well if you're down on the south coast here. It's beautiful both inside the fort, beautifully restored now, lots of very nice hotels. This property here is an Aman, if you've got the budget to stay there, probably that one there. But there's also lots of other nice boutique properties, but I would generally say 1 or 2 nights. If you're looking for somewhere down on the south coast, there's property like Cape Welligama, but for the coming season, the Fortress, which is a boutique property built about 15 years ago now, maintained to a high standard, is frankly offering the most outstanding value for money. And I would certainly say consider the Fortress for your stay down here on the south coast. So, this is my incredibly quick run around Sri Lanka. So just to recap, we did to the Cultural Triangle, we went to the east coast, we went to the low hill country, high hill country, we came down to the south coast and round to Galle. Now, particularly as an alternative, I would say to that winter itinerary, which had you doing your holiday down on the beach down here, the option is to fly to the Maldives. And frankly, if you want to do the Maldives and combine Sri Lanka and the Maldives, then even in the summer we would do that, but we would do things slightly differently. We would probably do the Cultural Triangle, we'd do Kandy, possibly the high tea country, and then over to Mali. It's just over an hour's flight. You're in the air for about an hour and 10 minutes, and you arrive in the Maldives. So international flights arrive into Mali. The first thing to bear in mind, hotel costs have reduced in the Maldives, and there is some outstanding value for money, and I'll touch on that very briefly as I go through a few possible places you could stay in the Maldives over the next 5 minutes. But the prices are generally at least twice the cost of an equivalent standard hotel in Sri Lanka. So if you're paying $300 a night for an Anantara in Sri Lanka, you will be paying $600 or $800 for an equivalent hotel. If you're buying a bottle of beer in Sri Lanka in a hotel, which may be as low as say £3 or £4, you're going to be paying at least £10 for a bottle of beer in the Maldives. So that's the first thing to remember. The next thing to just think about is speedboat versus seaplane, cost and convenience. The reason I say that, if you're combining Sri Lanka and the Maldives, if you're trying to maintain and manage cost and you're only doing a relatively short stay in the Maldives, it is cheaper to take a speedboat than a seaplane, and the convenience of getting on a speedboat as you get off the plane, come out of the terminal and literally step into your boat and being in your resort within an hour can really be a great advantage versus going to the seaplane terminal, waiting for the plane, taking a seaplane. It's going to be more expensive and it's going to take longer. So that's one thing to certainly think about. Another thing I'd always think about with the Maldives is half-board versus all-inclusive. We very rarely, if ever, sell on a bed and breakfast basis. You don't want the surprise of having to pay for all your meals as you go along. It's an expensive process. So one of the things we'll always suggest, and I know the team at Swords will say to you as well, budget and style. Let's understand the style of what you're looking for, and I'll touch on that very briefly in a second, but we really do need to understand the budget, because the budget is going to drive where we suggest. And I'm just going to run through about 7 or 8 hotels here, just to give you an idea of the types of properties that we feature. We might start off looking at a very big resort. Sun CM Olivelli is a 4-star property. It's been around forever. It is one of the original hotels from the Maldives. It's a 45-minute speedboat away. But interesting enough, it's gone through extensive refurbishment. They started off with this concept of 4 rooms in a block, 2 upstairs, 2 downstairs, and that still exists at the entry level. But as they've expanded over the recent past, they've almost doubled the number of rooms. They've put on a second island, and one of the things they've done is they've invested in both overwater and on beach properties, which are really at a new standard for them. So something like Olivelli would be the entry level that we would suggest. Another great value for money property is Oblu. Well, I should have said Olivelli you can book as either full board or you can pay an all-inclusive supplement. Oblu by Atmosphere is a 4-star all-inclusive property. I could have listed lots of other all-inclusive properties in the 3-star plus and the 4-star market. And whilst we feature those, I particularly like this because the resort's not too big, 125 rooms, 50 minutes by speedboat. You can swim to the house reef, separate adult pool, excellent value for money 4-star property. And actually, for those that are really looking for a water villa, it has the best value entry-level pool water villa, I think, in the 4-star market. So contemporary, fresh, quite recently refurbished, and not too big an island. Step up from there is to go into the 5-star market, and that's to Oblu Sangeli. Sangeli I've just flagged as an entry-level 5-star resort. Sister property to the previous Oblu property we saw, 137 rooms, so slightly bigger, but still relatively small. As you can see from that image there, a lot of overwater villas. And one of the things you will find in the Maldives is the newer hotels, many more of them are building over water because they're building on smaller islands. The bigger islands have already been used. And the only way they can get those number of keys and all the other facilities they're wanting is by building over water. And over water doesn't work for everybody. I'll be honest, I prefer to be on the beach than I do to prefer to be over water. If it's your first time to the Maldives, an element of overwater is good. If you have a young family, it doesn't necessarily work. But Sangeli, we would see as a good 4-star plus property, entry level 5-star. You can see here by the imagery, a little bit more contemporary than Oblu, a little sharper, and it's only been open for about 18 months. The next property I just want to mention is Lux South Ariatel. And with each of these properties, we're stepping up half a star in the ratings. Lux South Ariatel is a solidly good 5-star property, and Mark and his team, I'm sure, have sold this property many times. It's been around, it's been re-engineered, it's been rebranded, and they've invested in it each time. As a result of which, Lux today offers one of the best 5-star all-inclusive options. It has got 7 restaurants, and you can use 5, in fact, this year 6, but from next year, you can use 5 of those on the all-inclusive program. So you're not going somewhere where you've got a limited choice, you're stuck with a buffet restaurant. You've got specialty restaurants which you can actually engage with. And importantly, currently we've got 50% off the bed and breakfast rates, booked by the end of January with Swords Travel, and we will be able to give you a 50% discount off the bed and breakfast rates for any stays up until the beginning of January 2022. So some fantastic value for money there. Those Oblu properties I mentioned before, they've got between 35 and 40% discounts at the moment. Now let's just feature on 2 other properties before I finish. Gili Lankan Fushi. Gili Lankan Fushi has been around for some 30 years. It is one of the original very high-end luxury resorts. It is barefoot luxury, 45 villas all built over water. And this is one of the typical villas with a full-size pool. Really super high-end luxury, but the pricing also matches it. but it's a Robinson Crusoe rustic experience. And if you are doing Sri Lanka and the Maldives, and if you're looking for a relatively short stay, maybe 4 or 5 nights in the Maldives, and you've got the budget, Gili Lankan Fushi is a great option. 20 minutes by speedboat from the airport, and you get a Robinson Crusoe experience. And if you stay in the right villa, they even give you a little motorboat as private motorboat for you to use during the day to get backwards and forwards to the island, where there are the facilities of the hotel. And the last property I'm going to feature, and then I'm going to finish, is Como Malafushi. And I want to just contrast 2 things, because interestingly enough, Gili Lankan Fushi that we looked at a moment ago and Como Malafushi both have the same owner. They are both barefoot luxury, although you can immediately see with the imagery here of the rooms, Como's a little bit more contemporary, it's a little bit sharper, but the big difference is it's remote. Whereas Gili Lankan Fushi is actually 20 minutes from the airport, and as a result of which you will get more seaplanes flying over, you will get more speedboats coming closer to the property. Como Malafushi is an hour by seaplane south. They've got 65 overland and over water villas. They've got the outstanding Como Shambhala Spa, which all Como properties have, but you're getting remoteness and privacy. And not surprisingly, a property like this is very, very popular with kind of the celebrity crowd, but people who are looking for not to be seen, but to actually have privacy and quietness. So one of my favourite properties, that's an incredibly quick run through the Maldives. I could have spent the whole 45 minutes talking about different hotels in the Maldives, but that would have been boring. What we need to do is understand through Mark and his team what you're looking for in terms of style and your budget, and then we can give you 2 or 3 suggestions for how to combine Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Mark, thank you very much. That's me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Neil. That was such a great presentation. And I know, like you say, it's so hard to fit all that information within 45 minutes because there's so much to learn about each, well, especially Sri Lanka, but obviously there's so much to learn about both destinations.
Yeah.
I've not got any questions coming, but I've got a question for you. If I was a first timer going to Sri Lanka and the Maldives, what do you think the minimum is really that you want to be spending in Sri Lanka and also in the Maldives? So a total duration that you'd be looking for as an absolute minimum?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you've got a 2-week holiday, I think it. Well, let me go back a stage. It depends what you're looking to get out of it. If this is just go and relax and do absolutely nothing, we know plenty of people who like to go and spend 2 weeks just sitting on the beach in the Maldives. To do justice to touring, you really need to be spending at least, I would say, 4 or 5. I'm sorry, I'm just going to stop my screen sharing here. Sorry, that's much better. Sorry. I think you really need to be spending around 8 days touring, 8 to 10 days in Sri Lanka, because if you do those 3 nights in the Cultural Triangle, if you do 3 nights in the Low Hill Country, and you do 2 nights in the High Tea Country and 2 nights in a wildlife park, there's 10 nights gone there.
Yeah.
That gives you a really nice relaxed itinerary. What we hate doing is putting people into somewhere for 1 and 2 nights. They're forever on the move, and you end up exhausted at the end of that first 10 days. And you flop on the beach for 4 days and you've just about recovered by the time it's time to go home. So, I think 2 weeks really is a minimum for going to Sri Lanka. If you can, 8 to 10 days touring and then up to a week for sitting on the beach. So, and frankly, with some of the pricing available for this coming year, I think, extending your holiday by 2 or 3 nights and perhaps using some of the time you've not used up this year is a great option, because if not, you'll feel a little bit cheated, I think, with some of it. And frankly, when you're combining Sri Lanka and the Maldives, again, it depends on how you want to do it. If it's a honeymoon, people want to do a week of sightseeing and a week sitting by the beach, that combines fine. We just need to make sure we understand that. And what you shouldn't try to do is, if you've only got 6 or 7 days, is try and do the whole island, because it's a small island, but the journey times are long. So, you end up going from the Cultural Triangle. We have people who say, well, can't we go to Gaul that day? Well, you can't. There's a motorway now, it takes you down, but you're still going to spend 5 or 6 hours, in the car. People say, well, I don't want to go from Kandy to Yala by the motorway. I want to go up over the hills and down. Okay, that's 8 hours of driving. You know, it's not 8 hours, a nice full day's journey. It's 8 hours of driving plus your stops. And so, yeah, you need to bear those things in mind.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing I didn't realise about Sri Lanka initially, that it is so vast, especially to travel around, and obviously the distances between places, which has been a massive help just working with you guys on itineraries and understanding the destination. And I suppose one other question that people will be thinking about at the moment, and obviously we know this, but from a client perspective, is that when people book with ourselves and you guys, is that you've got the book with confidence policy, so that no matter what, we know that if we're booking with Travel Gallery and there is an issue with COVID, you guys will offer to amend or refund ultimately if that trip couldn't go.
Yeah, I mean, up to 60 days out, if there is a COVID-related, concern that you've got for whatever that might be, we can amend. We'll amend the date, and we'll tell you at the time of booking if we're committing anything that's going to be, at that point paid out. So if there is some conditions. And then what we've done is we've tried to say, well, between 60 and whenever we have to issue the tickets, which is the biggest driver of when costs become committed, we're trying to be as flexible as possible. So, if the airline's giving us a ticketing deadline only 2 weeks before the travel, we'll say to the client, well, fine, no problem. We don't need to collect the balance until much closer. The traditional 10 weeks before, to give us all a nice orderly process of you paying us and us paying the hotel. That's go out the window. We're happy to keep the flexibility, take people's payments as take a deposit, get a commitment, but collect balances at a later date, and that's the best commitment we can give to people. We will pass on that flexibility. This year we were able to refund everybody who was entitled to a refund promptly, and those who chose to cancel, and we worked with them to cancel at the absolute minimum costs, or no cost, or to move the dates, and I'm pleased to say we've been really successful with that.
Brilliant. Yeah, and definitely from our side as well, I think it's that ease and transparency that just makes it so much easier for people to want to commit, I suppose. But yeah, thank you so much, Neil, for your presentation. It's brilliant, and I'm sure we'll have lots of people interested in Sri Lanka and the Maldives. I think everybody's going to be looking to do maybe 1 or 2 holidays in 2021. So
we hope so.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I know. I mean, when you were talking about the Maldives at the end there, I was in the Maldives in March, and I was at Como Malafushi and Gili Lankan Fushi, and they're both amazing properties. But it's interesting because we also had training this morning with the Oblu properties as well, and they offer such fantastic value for money, and especially if you're wanting that all-inclusive aspect as well, which I think a lot of people do now when they're going to the Maldives. So some really great properties covered there, and like I say, once you speak to ourselves at Swords, we'll be speaking to the Travel Gallery to tailor make an itinerary specifically for you based on your interest, and also, like Neil says, budget and style as well. So I'm going to draw out our winner for today's prize draw, which will win £200 worth of vouchers, and the winner is Christine Shotton. So congratulations, Christine. You've got £200 towards your next holiday to Sri Lanka and the Maldives with Travel Gallery. That's everything from us today. Thank you for everybody for joining the webinar. Really appreciate it. And that's actually the end of our webinars now for 2020, but we will be looking to do some more in 2021 on different destinations. And if you do have any inquiries about Sri Lanka or the Maldives, Indian Ocean in general, please do get in touch and we would love to help. But thank you very much for your time and have a great week.
Thanks, Mark. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.